What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video. It's that time to talk about my top 10 best movies of 2023. Now, of course, we're now in 2024, so happy new year to all of you guys, and I look forward to talking about so many movies. I have some early movie reviews dropping later this week. I unfortunately have been a little bit busy the last few days, which is why this video is coming to you in 2024, very start of it versus coming at the very tail end of 2023. But I appreciate anybody who's checked out my video for my top 10 worst movies of 2023 so far, and today we're here to talk about my favorite movies of the year. And I gotta be honest in saying that this was without a doubt one of the hardest lists that I've ever had to put together in my entire life. 2023 was a great year for movies, and whenever I talk to somebody about 2023 movies and they say, it felt like a mid-year or it felt like an okay year for movies, I just instantly think to myself, well, you probably didn't see a whole lot of movies this year, in my genuine opinion. Now, as of filming this, I saw 110 2023 releases within the year of 2023. And like any other year, there's going to be tons of movies that I still haven't seen that may have made it on this list and just didn't make it because I didn't get around to seeing it. So this is just my thoughts on the movies that I got to see within 2023. Of course, this list will likely change as I catch up on some of those movies over time. And there are different kind of rules that I kind of have for building a list like this. There are movies that I'll tell you flat out are not in this list or in my honorable mentions. Movies like Oppenheimer, Killers of the Flower Moon, or Maestro that I gave all great reviews to, and I thought they were all incredibly well made films by great artists and directors, actors, all that great stuff. But they just didn't have that rewatchability for me, and that's a huge factor when it comes to talking about my favorite movies of the year. So as we get into my opinions here, this is a mixed bag of movies that, you know, just really sat with me in different ways. Maybe it leaned into my geeky side and it just made me smile and entertained. It has that rewatchability. Maybe it's something that did really connect to me emotionally when it comes down to its story or its character, or it was just flat out fun to watch. There are some movies on here that I could recognize maybe aren't better written than other movies, but were just movies that I enjoyed more than another. So I just got to be honest in saying that before we get into this. There are some movies that I think were incredibly well made, like Oppenheimer or Killers of the Flower Moon, but just did not have that rewatchability and that fun factor for me that would make me want to come back to these movies time and time again, which does play a huge role in me calling it one of my favorite movies of the year. So like I did with my top 10 worst, I'm going to give you guys my honorable mentions, which are going to be my 11 through 20. So without further ado, let's get into that without any real in-depth discussion on them, and then we'll get into my top 10, which is what you guys clicked on this video for. Number 20, I have The Flash, which is a movie I was hoping would be way higher on this list at the start of the year. It's at 20. Number 19 is The Iron Claw. Number 18, John Wick Chapter 4. Number 17, Evil Dead Rise. Number 16, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Again, another one that I wished was higher on this list, but just didn't make the cut. Number 15, American Fiction. Number 14, Saw X or Saw 10. Number 13, Fair Play. Number 12, the Super Mario Brothers movie. And number 11, Poor Things. All great movies, and like I said, this was a tough year for movies. Some of those movies I mentioned in there were either just silly or goofy, good fun times that leaned into my geeky side of things. Something like the Super Mario Brothers or The Flash or Indiana Jones that definitely leaned into the things that made me love movies and video games and geek culture as a kid. Those movies are just good popcorn films to me that I just had a lot of fun with this year and enjoyed revisiting. And there's some other ones in there that are some great artistically very standout films of the year that just maybe didn't have as much rewatchability for me, or are just really great films and I just had a hard time narrowing it down. I do truly believe that this overall list that I built here for this video could change depending on my mood for the day and what I'm looking for in a movie, because like I said, out of the 110 movies that I saw this year, I'm very happy to say that majority of the movies I saw this year were at least a good time. There are so many movies that did not make it on my top 10 best or top 10 worst, even within the top 20 of each list, that were good movies. There were a lot of good movies that just didn't make the cut on either list, but they were still a good time. And so it made it really hard to narrow down my favorites when it comes to 2023. But without further ado, let's not waste any more of your guys' time. Let's jump into my top 10, which is what you clicked on the video for, with number 10 being The Creator, directed by Gareth Edwards and starring people like John David Washington, Madeline Yuna Voiles. You got Jenna Chan in this movie, Allison Janney, and this is a movie that I was so enamored with when I saw the trailers. It looked like it was going to be right up my alley. If you guys have been following this channel and you've gotten a bit of a taste of my personal taste when it comes to movies, you know that sci-fi, fantasy, it's my favorite genres. I love those worlds. I love when something can take me into another world. As a kid and even as an adult, I tend to lean into a lot of negative thoughts. I tend to be a pretty realistic and logical person in my day-to-day basis, which oftentimes tends to kind of make me be somebody who leans into negativity at times, as sometimes reality can be a little bit dull, can be a little bit sad, and not necessarily be what we create it to be in our head. That's not to say that you can't have a great life as well, but I just know that about myself. And so as a kid, and now as an adult, I've just always loved movies that can port me into a world that's imaginative and that somebody came up with and was creative. And in the case of The Creator, that we got exactly that. And I really was heartbroken to see, as this movie came out, that it wasn't getting the greatest reviews from certain people, including some of my peers who may be watching this and thinking, wow, I can't believe you put this on your top 10. But for me, the movie was just so cool. I really enjoyed the world. I thought the action was fun. The movie's a little slow at times, but I enjoyed the story. I enjoyed what it had to say about what makes a life in a lot of ways. You have the young girl in this movie who's her first role ever in a movie, and she was so cute and charming, and I just really thoroughly enjoyed her. John David Washington is great in this movie as well, and I enjoyed the visuals. The movie is beautiful to look at. It looks more expensive in a lot of ways than some of the biggest blockbusters that came out this year, and was made for a fraction of the price or a fraction of the cost. And it's just insane to me that this movie didn't succeed in the way that I felt it should have, but I'm so happy to put it on my list of my top 10 movies of 2023. Now moving on to number 9, we have Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem, which is directed by Jeff Rowe and Kyler Spears, stars people like Brady Noon, Shaman Brown Jr., Micah Abbey, Jackie Chan, and so many more. And such a cool movie. I just really enjoyed this. I think it's got to be one of the coolest looking Ninja Turtles movies and Ninja Turtle things that we've ever gotten. And as a kid, I love Ninja Turtles. I grew up watching the show from the early 90s and from the 80s. I used to read some of the comic books, and I played tons of the video games, especially a lot of the arcade games that I think if you're a Ninja Turtles fan and you grew up in the 90s, there's no way you didn't play those old arcade games for the Ninja Turtles. I've played countless versions on the NES, and even just recently played some of the more remastered versions on my Xbox. I've always been a huge fan of the Ninja Turtles. I've enjoyed the various cartoons that have come out, and even some of the movies that aren't amazing. I always enjoyed the Turtles themselves, and I just think that they're a set of characters that for me are always going to be entertaining. And here we are with this movie that Seth Rogen kind of birthed with a lot of other people, that just visually was super cool. And one of the coolest parts about this movie is that all of the turtles are actually, for the first time ever, played by teenagers who all filmed and recorded their portions of the movie in the exact same location, which gave this banter off of the characters this really real feel and vibe. You felt a brotherly energy from all these characters in this movie. And just overall, even though I think there are parts of the story that I don't think are absolutely incredible, and I didn't necessarily love the April element of this film and the puking kind of gag they had with her, visually I thought the film was tons of fun to watch. I've seen it more than once, and I just was entertained by this movie. I just thought it was fun, very cute at times, super badass at other times. There were some really funny moments as well, and even though I didn't love everything about it, I just couldn't stop thinking about this movie as we got closer to the end of the year, and I was thinking about some of my favorite movies. Moving on now to number 8 is Past Lives, which is directed and written by Celine Song, and it stars people like Greta Lee, T.O.U., and John Magaro. And I mentioned before that there are films on this list that are just good, fun movies that might be attached to my nostalgia and my bias and my geekiness of certain franchises that I was excited to see movies for this year. But every here and there, there's something that just really connects with me on a deep emotional level, which is the main thing that you want out of a movie, right? And when it comes down to Past Lives, I just felt like this movie really connected with me. I didn't get to see it in theaters. I actually checked it out just a few weeks ago for the very first time, and I saw it here on this couch with my buddy Robbie of the Big Rob Theory. And here we are, two dudes watching this movie that we knew was a romance of some sort, but didn't necessarily know what to expect of it. And we're sitting here talking to the screen. We're like getting upset at certain moments. We're feeling the discomfort of it. But more than than anything, we were so impressed with the filmmaking and the acting and a lot of just the small moments of nuance between our characters in this movie that just genuinely for me told a really real human story. I think as we get older in life, we start to recognize the lives that just kind of slip us by, you know, how a decision that could be made could completely alter who is still in your life and how you continue to live that life. And even whether it's in a romantic situation like this movie or just with friends, sometimes when you kind of reconnect with somebody in your life, whether it's romantic or just a friendship level, and then you guys go apart and maybe you guys don't really connect again after that, it sometimes just really gets into your heart. You know, I can think about so many times that I've had friends that I used to be incredibly close with and we didn't see each other for years, and then we reconnected and it was like no time had passed, but then life kind of ripped us apart again, and you start to wonder, like, man, what could that friendship continue to be? What could that friendship have been, you know? And in the case of this, it's more of a romantic edge, but this story just really connected with me. I thought the performances were incredible. The two leads in this film are so good, with Greta Lee probably being the standout of the two of them. But just the performances were great. The nuance between the characters were great. The overall dialogue and some of the tension you feel in these scenes. It's a movie that, compared to a lot of the other movies on my list, is a lot slower, but it just genuinely kept me gripped. I never felt bored while watching this movie, and it's one that's really stuck with me as I've gotten closer to the end of the year, even though I only saw it a few weeks ago. But it's just a movie that I just had to put on my top 10. I just thought the story and the characters and the dialogue and all of that was really well done. Moving on to number 7 is Wish, which is directed by Chris Buck and Fawn Vera Sunthorn, and it stars people like Ariana DeBose, Chris Pine, Alan Tudyk, and many more. And I already know what you're thinking. What? Wish? I was so heartbroken after this movie actually officially released to see so many negative reviews for this movie. I got to see the movie a few days earlier, probably a little bit over a week before the movie actually released to the general public. And I didn't see any other reviews. I didn't see anybody's opinions. And I walked out of this movie ecstatic. I had such a great time with Wish. This film is the celebration of 100 years of Disney. And while I can totally understand that it wasn't the celebration movie that a lot of people wanted from Disney, I just genuinely connected with this movie. And I just was struggling almost with putting this in my top 10. I felt like I would have been judged by some people. I felt like people were going to look at this and go, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about movies. But I think the beautiful part about top 10 list and looking at tons of other people's, I've watched a bunch of videos of my peers and other people that I watch on YouTube talking about their top 10s, and everybody's list is so drastically different. And it just gave me that comfort to just really just solidify my feelings on Wish. I love this movie. I thought it was beautifully animated. I love the musical numbers in this film, which have been one of the biggest criticized things about this movie. And I can wholly recognize that it is not an original story, nor is it a film that fully develops all of its side characters, but it's a movie about feel. It's a movie that really touched my heart, as I've always been a dreamer. And this movie is about us kind of sending our wishes off into the world, our dreams off into the world, and a lot of times kind of forgetting them in doing so. You go around, you tell people what you wish, what you dream, but you kind of lose kind of the path of you making that a reality yourself. And this movie is all about taking your own path, about taking your wishes and taking your dreams and just making it your own path, and not letting somebody else dictate whether or not that dream or that wish should become a reality. And as somebody who's always been a dreamer, I came out of high school, I was instantly in a band. I did that for years, just doing gigs, making money doing that. You know, it was something that was really cool for me at the time, and it was something that I wanted to make a reality. Unfortunately, it fell apart and I let it eat away at me, and I stopped being creative in any way, shape, or form. I just stopped putting myself out there in any sort of creative manner, and I let it kind of destroy me. I almost forgot what I wanted in life. And then I started doing YouTube, and I made it a point with a lot of the successes I've had on YouTube now to just keep on. You know, I have a monetized channel now. I've had a sponsor as of recently. This past year was able to become part of a Critics Association group here in Central Florida that's gained me access to movies early, or to press screeners and different things like that. And I wouldn't have been able to obtain any of that if I just gave up, if I didn't put in the work, if I didn't actually chase this wish, this dream to make, film criticism on YouTube a thing. And so I couldn't help but feel all those things while I was watching Wish. And I think that the story just resonated with somebody like me a lot more than maybe it does with everybody. I saw a lot of people calling this a mediocre Disney movie, and I just could not disagree more. I just, as I got to the end of the year, I just couldn't disagree more. There are songs from this movie that I've been singing since I saw it the first time, and the story just resonated with me. And if you see my very first review for it that I did before any of the other reviews came out that I had watched, you'll see that I was just really into this movie, and I just have to be true to myself and recognize that Wish deserves a spot on this list. Moving on to number 6 is Barbie, directed by Greta Gerwig, starring people like Margot Robbie, Ryan Gosling, Kate McKinnon, Simu Liu, America Ferrera. This is a movie that, man, I just knew was going to be good when I heard that Greta Gerwig was the one who was directing it, and that just gave me so much excitement to see this movie because Barbie, I'm not like a Barbie guy. I used to play with my sister as a kid. I'd bring my little, I'd bring the X-Men into a situation where, Wolverine is getting married to my sister's Barbie or something like that, or her Polly Pocket. But, I don't have anything to do with Barbie in my life. And there's been a bajillion animated Barbie movies and little cartoons that have come out that just kind of, fly under the radar or for kids. And Barbie, a live action movie, could have easily just been thrown away kind of to a throwaway director, just somebody who's just kind of does kids movies and nothing more, and just doesn't really give it some like deep artistic merit, just a throwaway cute Barbie movie. It easily could have been that, but instead they gave it to a writer and director who just knows what she's doing, that knows how to take something like Barbie that's absurd and make it fun, make it funny, but also have a really deep message in there. And while there's some moments where the message is very heavy-handed, I think it makes some really, really great messages and really great points in this movie that, has a lot to say, of course, about women and feminism, different things like that. I've seen a lot of people walk away from this movie saying that it's a man-hating film, and I couldn't disagree more. For me, this movie kind of talked about both men and women and how we shouldn't necessarily feel like we have to be pigeonholed into whatever the gender roles specifically are. And that's something I can totally relate to. You see somebody like Ken in this movie played by Ryan Gosling, and his whole thing is that he feels like he has to be this certain kind of guy, this certain kind of man, and that's what's going to attract somebody like Barbie to him. But the more he's like that, the less likable he is. And I think that that's just so true in life. As somebody who, I had my father in my life, I had plenty of men in my life that I think allowed me to maintain my manliness, if you will. But I lived with my mom, I lived with my sister, I lived with my grandma. A lot of the time, my parents were divorced. And I think spending so much time around women just let me be very comfortable in who I am and what I am, and I don't ever feel personally this need to be a man and to show my masculinity. There's certain things that about myself that are clearly masculine, but I don't go out of my way to feel like I need to do that. But I know a lot of guys in my age range or in my group of friends as I was growing up that even the slightest thing that would even challenge their masculinity in a moment would be like, well, I'm actually a man, so I don't partake in such thing. It's just so silly. And I love that this movie poked fun at both women and men and had a lot of, jokes and social commentary on gender roles. Again, in a Barbie movie, something that just could have been throwaway. I think Greta Gerwig did an incredible job with this movie, and I just thoroughly enjoyed it. And it just, whether it was the production value, the performances, the costume design, just there was so much fun creativity with this movie that I ultimately just found, again, this could have been a throwaway movie, and it was so well done. I also saw it in a packed theater the first time around with people cosplayed as tons of different Barbies, men and women. There was Kens all over the place. I was a cowboy Ken sitting right in front of me, and I was just so in love with the camaraderie that this movie kind of had, along with that whole weekend of Barbenheimer. I thought it was really awesome, and this movie just stood out for me as we got closer to the end of the year. Moving on to number 5 is a movie that came out not too long ago and instantly threw itself into my top 10, and that is Godzilla -1, which is directed by Takashi Yamazaki and stars people like Ryonosaki Kamiki, Sakura Ando, and Minami Hamabe. Sorry if I butchered any of those. And yeah, this has got to be one of the best Godzilla movies that's ever come out, right? Like, I think anybody who's seen this movie that is a Godzilla fan has pretty much said just that. A lot of the Godzilla movies tend to just be action, they tend to be silly. I grew up watching a lot of the old school Godzilla films, and while they had some stories and some plots and some are better than others, a lot of times, you know, it was just about seeing the dudes in the rubber suits beat each other's asses. And in recent years, with things like the American Legendary Pictures films that have been coming out, they've been far more heavily leaning into the action, more so than into story. And in the case of this movie, they kind of had a Jaws approach, if you will, where the movie primarily focuses on our human characters, our human cast, and then really is able to make Godzilla this menacing threat when he shows up in the worst times and actually threatens the livelihood of these characters that you've actually grown to enjoy. That's the way that any good monster movie should be done. Now, don't get me wrong, I love the fact that we have a mixed bag in this day and age. I love that we have Godzilla movies and these monster movies where it can just be all out beautiful CGI action, but I also love that we got something like -1 that kind of plays as a prequel to the original Godzilla and is able to tell an actually enticing story where you actually don't want to see these characters get killed by Godzilla. A lot of times I don't care who Godzilla kills, who's in the movie. I don't care how big the actors or actresses who are in the movie are that die by the hand of Godzilla a lot of times. But in the case of this movie, I was rooting for our humans who were fighting Godzilla, which made Godzilla an actual menacing threat once again, instead of the more hero kind of, you know, kind of hero of the world kind of thing that they've been approaching with the more recent films from Legendary Pictures. He's a monster in this movie, and I just thought it was such a good time. I love the look, the feel, the vibe of this movie, and it's a movie I look forward to revisiting many, many more times. Moving on to number 4 is Scream 6, directed by Matt Bettinelli, Olpen, and Tyler Gillette, and stars people like Melissa Barrera, Jenna Ortega, Jack Champion, Courtney Cox, and many more. And man, this had to be one of the most fun experiences I had in the theater this year. I had so much fun watching this on opening night. It was a packed theater. People were all just dressed like Ghostface or had all these different Scream and Ghostface merchandise on them. And when all these different things were going on, you know, people were getting chased, people were getting killed, everybody was so reactive. And I think that really just adds to the experience, right? I got to see this movie with a packed theater of people who were so reactive to the kills and to the tense moments. People were screaming and making funny comments, and it never felt overbearing. It never felt like it ruined the theatrical experience. It felt like I was on a ride with the entire audience. And when people would kind of have a, you know, big reaction, maybe somebody would scream because they were actually scared, it would cause certain people and a lot of us to kind of laugh in the theater. But again, it never ruined the experience. It felt like everybody was having a good time. And just ultimately, by the time we got to the end of the film and there's all these reveals and there's all these different kills going on and people are cheering in the theater, it just ultimately was easily one of my favorite movie-going experiences of 2023, which was pretty early on in the year, but it stood out to me. And if you guys have been following this channel, you know that I'm a huge fan of slashers. I love slasher movies. I love the Scream franchise. I've given every movie in the Scream franchise a positive review when I've reviewed them here on the channel. And I think without a doubt, it's consistently proven to be one of the most consistent slasher franchises. My favorite slasher franchise is Chucky, but let's be honest, they're not necessarily consistently good. They're consistently fun for me, but not necessarily because they're great. I like how stupid and silly those movies are. But in terms of actual quality slashers, Scream has to be probably the most consistent franchise across the board. And I think Scream 6 fits in just fine. And I'm heartbroken to see what's going on with the 7th film. I'm glad I at least like this one. Moving on to number 3 is a film I didn't even expect to be on my list, which was Dungeons & Dragons: Honor Among Thieves, which is directed by John Francis Daly and Jonathan Goldstein, and stars people like Chris Pine, Michelle Rodriguez, Justice Smith, and many more. And again, like I mentioned before, I love fantasy, I love sci-fi, and this isn't a movie that I would necessarily say is better written than a lot of the movies I've already talked about here on the list, or even some that didn't even make my top 20, but it was just fun. I just loved this movie. I've seen it multiple times now. I love the practical effects. I love the CGI. There were so many animatronics and great practical costumes used and makeup used in this film. There's so many fun action sequences in this film. It's silly. It knows what it is. And this is the epitome of a movie that I could just kind of throw on at any time, which is part of why it's so high up on my list. I could just really throw this on at any time, have a laugh with the characters. It doesn't really demand an entire big bunch from you. new. There's tons of big cast members in this film, even some that make small cameo roles in this movie. And just when I look at my personal taste in movies and just what I just like silly, over-the-top, big fantasy action movies that can, take me to another world. And as somebody who doesn't play Dungeons and Dragons and just kind of knows of it from the outside, it's kind of the cultural zeitgeist, but isn't really well versed in playing it themselves outside of watching, some people play it online and just like videos of people doing the role play and all that kind of stuff. I was just instantly pulled into this world, and it made me excited to want to see a sequel, even though this movie unfortunately didn't do so well in theaters, so we don't know if we'll get one, but I really hope we do. I thought the cast was really charming, and I've noticed upon rewatches that this film just became more and more fun and charming to me, which is why, as I was making this list, every time I put it higher on the list, or like a little, obviously that it was kind of lower on the rankings, if you will, I just didn't feel right about it. The part of me that just wanted to have fun with this movie ultimately just kept nudging it up closer to number 1, and that's why it's sitting at number 3. And here we are now with number 2, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, of course directed by James Gunn for the final time, and starring people like Chris Pratt and Bradley Cooper, Zoe Saldana, Dave Bautista, the rest of the gang. And this was, meant to be the finale of James Gunn's iteration of the Guardians of the Galaxy. In the comics, these characters and the lineup has changed multiple times, including characters that are part of the Avengers and other characters that we haven't even seen in any of the MCU projects. And I just thought that this was the perfect send-off for the iteration of the Guardians that we had been following since the 2014 film. I think that James Gunn and the rest of the crew and the cast came together to make a movie that's fun. It was visually epic. There's so many funny moments, some badass moments of action, and some really emotionally heavy moments, especially around the character of Rocket. This movie at its core is Rocket's movie. Bradley Cooper was incredible in this film as Rocket Raccoon, and I just thoroughly enjoyed so many of the moments of this film. I was never bored while watching this movie. I just had a smile on my face with so many moments, but also was so emotionally gripped by this movie. I knew what to expect going into this movie with the Rocket Raccoon story once I saw the trailers, because I am pretty well versed in the comic books when it comes to Guardians of the Galaxy. So I knew we were in for some sadness, to be completely and utterly honest, but man, did I have a good time with this movie. I would say my only big gripe with this movie is the Adam Warlock element of it, as he's one of the most badass characters in the comics, and they kind of just made him a dumbass character in this movie. But besides that element of the film, I genuinely found this to be one of the biggest standout movies of the year for me. And as a huge comic book nerd that wanted to see so many of the big comic book movies this year be awesome, that ultimately were just either okay or at least fun enough, but just could not make my best of list, I'm happy that Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 was at least one of them that made it within my top 10. But I'm so much more happy to talk about number 1, which is Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, which is directed by Joaquim Dos Santos, Kemp Powers, and Justin K. Thompson, and stars people like Shameik Moore and Haley Steinfeld once again, and has people like Jake Johnson and Oscar Isaac and so many more. And this was a movie I was so excited to check out when I saw the trailer for it. It's a movie that I was so excited to check out when they announced the sequel was going to be coming out to Into the Spider-Verse, which I loved, was one of my favorite movies of the year that movie came out. And as the movie years went on, this movie just absolutely was my favorite movie of the year. I loved it. I loved it upon rewatches, and it's a movie that just visually beautiful, just like the first one. The animation is so crisp and so good to look at, and I just love that this film is able to not only be this film that is jam-packed with Easter eggs and references and all the geeky stuff that just leans into this being something that would, get all the fans to be like, ooh, look at that, ooh, look at that. It kind of felt like that element where it's like you're getting a theme park ride kind of element of a film. You're getting like the cotton candy side of watching a movie where they're giving you all these little treats with different things like that throughout the course of the movie, all the little Easter eggs and the little cameos. There's so many Spider-Man in this film. But on top of that, it's like the Empire Strikes Back of Spider-Man movies, in my opinion, in a lot of ways, where it just took everything that the first film was, doubled down on it, gave us an actually good story with a great cliffhanger that leaves you excited for the next movie, but tells its own story. It gives you a sense of finality. It sets things up and pays them off by the time you get to the end of the movie, while also leaving things open-ended for that next movie. I just thought that in terms of it being a middle piece of a movie, which, tends to be a rough thing for trilogies. The middle portion is either going to work for you or not work for you sometimes. sometimes, or sometimes they either do too much or too little to either set up or not set up the next movie. And I really genuinely thought that Across the Spider-Verse did an incredible job of playing off of Into the Spider-Verse, allowing you to come in, get a new story told to you, and set up some new things that are paid off within the movie itself while still leaving it open-ended. I just thought it was so brilliantly well done. Visually, it was beautiful once again. I love the animation style of both Into the Spider-Verse and Across the Spider-Verse now. And of course, with this one coming out a few years later, there are some advancements. You can tell that they were given a little bit more of a budget to make it look a little bit more smooth, even though the first movie already looked beautiful. And I just think, without a doubt, it's instantly one of my favorite Spider-Man movies that's ever come out. I mean, I would say that about the first one as well. But just genuinely, I was so emotionally connected to this movie. I love the characters. I love the story. I love the voice work. I love the animation. I love all the Easter eggs and the references. All of that stuff could have easily just been, you know, fun, stupid Easter egg stuff that's like cool, like that's awesome to see. But if the movie didn't have a substantial narrative, substantial character growth and a character arc, and great setup for what's to come, then, you know, maybe it just wouldn't have hit as emotionally as it did. But when it comes down to this movie, I just don't really have a lot of negatives that I can lean into. This is a movie that this year for me that is a 5-star movie. This is a movie this year for me that I will instantly rewatch any time of day. And without a shadow of a doubt, it was instantly the only choice in my mind. There wasn't even a question. I wasn't even battling at all. With all the other choices I had on this list and me kind of deciding, oh, should I put this one above that one and this one? I would argue that almost everything else on this list, in some way, except for maybe 1 and 2 here on my list, everything can kind of be alternated depending on my personal feelings on the day. I just had to solidify something for this video. But if there's absolutely anything I'm positive about, is that the best movie, in my opinion, that I saw of the 110 movies this year was Across the Spider-Verse. So with all that said, a big thanks to you guys for watching this video. It's been a lot of fun talking about these movies. Everything that I talked about here, I have done a review for on the channel if you are interested in hearing more in-depth thoughts on those individual movies. But I know that a lot of you are probably thinking, okay, well, I disagree with your list, or you agree with my list, whatever the case may be. So definitely comment down below. Let me know what your top 10 best movies of the year were. And in case I have to say it for those that don't already know it, this is just my personal subjective list. You know, I think that everybody's gonna have their own top 10, and I think that's a beautiful thing. That's the only way it should be. I wouldn't want everybody's top 10 to be the same as everybody else's. If there's something on my list here that you disagree with, that's cool with me. That's totally okay, because I probably disagree with your list too. But I'm just so happy to have talked about all these movies this year. And if there's something that you are curious about, you know, that maybe you felt like should have been on this list and you don't find a video for it here on my channel, maybe I just didn't see it, and maybe it instantly would have been on this list had I seen it. But a big thanks to you guys for watching despite the situation. I love talking about all these movies, and I appreciate all of you guys for checking this out, and I look forward to talking about more movies in 2024 with all you guys in the comments. So a big thanks to you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.